Welcome back. Let's start to unpack how informational lobbying works. Consider a target, a policymaker whose decision we want to influence, a congressman, a regulator, an agency official. There are three pathways of communication for reaching the target: direct lobbying, indirect lobbying of an influential third party, often the general public, secondary lobbying by the influential party, including grassroots lobbying via mobilized citizens. This figure shows you the pathways. Pathway 1 is direct contact, often called inside lobbying. Pathway 2 is indirect contact, sometimes called outside lobbying, if the influential actor is outside the institution. The influential third party may then engage in secondary lobbying. If the influential third party is the general public or an activist group, its members may engage in grassroots lobbying, for instance, calling, writing letters, staging demonstrations or protests. But public opinion polls may be sufficient to provoke a response from the target. Okay, here are some definitions. Direct or inside lobbying. In direct lobbying, the advocate approaches the target policymaker, him or herself, and attempts to influence a policy decision. Indirect or outside lobbying. In indirect lobbying, the advocate communicates with an influential third party in the hope that this party will in turn communicate with the target policymaker. The influential third party may be, and often is, ordinary citizens. Grassroots lobbying. In grassroots lobbying, the public or group members communicate with the target policymaker. This communication may be explicitly orchestrated by an indirect lobbyist. Let me give you some quick examples of the three pathways in action. In the first example, the President of the United States would like Congress to enact a new law. The Constitution affords the President great power in stopping congressional enactments through the legislative veto, but it gives him almost none for stimulating legislation. For instance, congressional failure to enact presidential proposals doesn't provoke a vote of no confidence in a new election, as it might well do in a parliamentary system. Of course, the president can lobby Congressman himself or herself, or use professionals from the White House Office of Congressional Relations. She can also have the administration bear some of the policymaking burden, for instance, by drafting legislation. So the president can act just like any other lobbyist. But a special resource for modern presidents is the so-called bully pulpit, in Teddy Roosevelt's memorable phrase. In other words, the president can exploit his high visibility and inherent newsworthiness to make public speeches. These may focus public attention on an issue or even change minds. This process is often called going public, and we'll return to going public in a minute. Going public is a form of indirect lobbying of Congress. If it works, citizens call or write their congressman, which is a form of grassroots lobbying. A similar strategy that presidents use is going local. Here, the president makes a special trip to the district of the target congressman, who may be a key leader or a swing vote. The president's visit almost always gains top local headlines and media attention, which allows him to engage citizens in the district, at least if the president isn't too unpopular. So, going local is another form of indirect lobbying. Then letters, calls, or comments from constituents provide grassroots lobbying of the target congressman. In the second example, a major corporation like General Motors wants Congress to enact a law, or perhaps GM wants to block passage of a law. Lobbyists from GM, including the CEO and board members, when the stakes are really high, may directly lobby key congressmen. But GM and companies like it have a powerful way to lobby indirectly, mobilize their so-called value chain, sometimes also called stakeholders in the company. The value chain is composed of companies that sell goods or services to GM or that sell GM's cars. These companies have a considerable interest in GM's welfare and may be willing to help it out. In the case of automobile manufacturers, a particularly useful part of the value chain from a political perspective is automobile dealerships. Every congressional district has a GM dealership, and the dealers are important employers and prominent local businessmen. A congressman will invariably return a call from an important local employer or businessman, and the congressman will listen attentively to what the local businessman has to say. What a great resource for GM. To summarize, mobilizing the value chain is a form of indirect lobbying for GM, and the calls to congressmen from auto dealers and other upstream or downstream firms in the value chain are a form of grassroots lobbying. GM might coordinate the grassroots effort, for instance, telling the dealers what to say and helping them contact their representative in Congress. The third example involves a regulated firm, say one of the for-profit education chains confronting a regulatory agency, for example, the Department of Education and its gainful employment regulation. The firm knows the regulation will quash profits or may even put the fly-by-night operation out of business. Under the Administrative Procedures Act, the firm can submit comments on the draft rule. The firm can also meet with officials from the agency and voice its concerns, a so-called ex parte contact. Obviously, this is direct lobbying, but the firm needn't stop there. Another venue is lobbying the congressional committees with power over the agency, particularly the authorizing committee that oversees the agency's performance and writes its legislation. For example, the Senate Committee on Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions, and the Appropriations Committee that funds the agency. Then the congressmen send the agency a message, perhaps through a meeting, a call, a letter, a hearing, or an amendment. So direct contacts with the agency are direct lobbying, contacts with the congressional committee are indirect lobbying, and contacts between the committee members and the agency are secondary lobbying. They're not grassroots lobbying, but the logic is similar. Now, can you think of another way the for-profit education firm can use indirect lobbying on the agency? Think about it. The fourth example concerns the mothers of East Los Angeles. What sort of direct, indirect, and grassroots lobbying could Mila employ? I'll give you a hint. There are multiple veto players who can stop the prison, and Mila needs only one of these to click in order to win. So there are multiple targets, not just one. I'll let you think about the complex Mila strategy on your own. It's a good exercise. This table you should take a look at. It summarizes a lot of what we just went through. Effectively lobbying an elite policymaker, like a legislator or a regulator, is quite different from effectively engaging the public. And both may be different from mobilizing group members, which often involves the collective action problems and solutions we studied earlier. In other words, different avenues present different problems that require different solutions. Okay. Are there some general principles or tools that allow us to analyze these differences and understand how best to communicate with different audiences? There are. We're going to rely on three of them: the exposure impact model, signaling theory, and the flags paradigm.